This is the Wisdom Table coming to you from the Grand Houses in Harlem, USA, 125th Street and Amsterdam Avenue. We're thankful to the Most High for blessing us with the opportunity to be with you and you to be with us. The program that you're about to hear does not reflect on the management of the NYCHA development in which Grand Houses is. Neither do the views expressed here reflect on the resident council, whom we're very thankful to for allowing us programming on their Grand Houses community radio, TV, and internet station. I'm Brother Leroy, and our guest today is Brother Norman Clement. He is a pharmacist, and we've had several episodes or segments dealing with Black pharmacies, Black-owned pharmacies, and the Drug Enforcement Agency. Today we're going to discuss that, plus possibly get into how senior citizens are treated in the medical field. Brother Norman, thank you for joining us on the Wisdom Table.
Oh, good. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good to be with you again. I hope all is healthy.
And let's start with how we were introduced to one another, and that is by way of the situation dealing with Black pharmacies. Black-owned pharmacies. And when we say Black pharmacies, we're talking about Black-owned pharmacies. You wouldn't know one from the other, except for the great service that you would get in the Black pharmacies located throughout the U.S. So, this particular, I'm sorry.
No, you were going to, I thought you.
No, go ahead, brother.
So what happened, how we were introduced to this, about 2015 or so, or probably later, about 2016, we started seeing a rash of pharmacies that are started to come under the scrutiny of the Drug Enforcement Agency, and primarily they were saying that they were concerned about patients getting prescriptions filled for control medications for which their doctors had prescribed from. These were prescriptions that patients had been examined and followed all the guidelines, and that these pharmacies had checked, and stating that these people they used the word diversion. In other words, they believed that the patients were getting the medications to divert them into illegal sources, and such was not the case. And then we started seeing, maybe around 2019, they came in and back several times and started raiding these pharmacies, taking our equipment, taking our medications, even ordering what we call immediate suspension orders and stating that our control license was suspended, that we were in violation of federal law, that we didn't follow course, all kind of allegate corresponding responsibility, that we were actively engaged in diversion and those sort of things. I mean, and in our case, they accused us of manufacturing and even opened up a criminal charge, stating that we needed separate licenses. So as this rash of pharmacies began to pick up, we all contacted each other and began to notice that they all had the same pattern, the same type of immediate suspension orders. These things are costly, and we began to team together in fight these orders. And of course, they gave us what we call a hearing, which is nothing but a kangaroo court, in which you cannot present, you should not follow federal rules of civil procedure, those sort of things. So we went to these hearings, and it was nothing but anything that we said was not believed, and it was just set up so that they could come in and snatch our property and get away with it. And they've been doing this for years. The sad part is that it happened to a lot of Black pharmacists. They didn't talk about it. They were just too embarrassed to talk about it. You know, it was a stain on their reputation and those sort of things. And but we did. We decided to get together and started getting the unique patterns. I got with my brother who had contacted me and said there's something wrong with these administrative orders. These so-called search warrants are defective. they're missing a lot of items on it. They're not. This is not a police investigation. This is a roguism, and then I had another friend who was involved in law enforcement and stated that this looks like this is nothing but racism. It's nothing but your low-hanging fruit. And the patterns repeated themselves. So then we formed a blog, youarewithinthenorms.com, and we began to do the research and point out that there was something seriously going on here. And that's where we're about right now in terms of what's going on. It's horrible. And what it does, and in effect, the U.S. government is used these pharmacies as part of the opioid crisis. And our conclusions are what we have been able to demonstrate is that the opioid crisis is one of America's most giant hoax that has ever been perpetrated on the public. It is an American medical tragedy, and it's based upon not the truth, but what we call medical, where the government is engaged in medical McCarthyisms in order to harvest these healthcare providers, black and white, in order to get better funding and believe that they're doing something in terms of the word, in terms of narcotic violation. And in fact, the word opioid is a misnomer that is been used by law, or is created by law enforcement in order to criminalize and demonize the whole classification of medications known as narcotic analgesics, and what we would call medications around the phenanthrene ring. The phenanthrene ring is the ring in which these chemicals, the chemical form or molecular form of the opioid are the alkaloid, and this is technical, is based around. Modifications of these ring will give you various type of medications which affects it, allows it to be absorbed differently, allows it to last longer, and so on. But the point is that they have criminalized these medical procedures until it is extremely difficult for people, particularly Black people of color and doctors of color, to prescribe these type of medications, which are necessary for the treatment of chronic pain, non-cancerous and cancerous pain. And so we have people calling in all the time, talking about this, giving us, thanking us for the articles that we've written, and addressing the targeting of and the harm that has been done based on the fact that the United States Department of Justice and the United States Drug Enforcement Agency have simply just created or manufactured a fraud in medical, a healthcare fraud in medicine. Mm-hmm.
Brother Norman Clement, let's go back a couple, and that is just a couple of points that you made to the extent of the DEA and these raids on these Black pharmacies that are innocent of being involved in an opioid trade, diverting pills from personal use to drug trade. That the funding that you mentioned is the justification for increases in budgets and promotions within the DEA. That's what you're referring to.
And not only the DEA, but within the Department of Justice and all the little agencies, the state agencies, the local police departments, the sheriffs, and those sort of things, down to the locality. They have funded these programs to target the healthcare providers. And unfortunately, some of them are going to prison for doing prescribing medications and treating patients the way they have been trained, the way they have been taught in medical school, and the guidelines that the Drug Enforcement Agency use come right out of the CDC, the Center of Disease Control Guidelines, which were developed in 2016, which have been proven to be unscientific and fraudulent. And yet these guidelines persist and they cause considerable harm. There was a recent article out of Columbia from a psychiatrist from Columbia University, a lady by the name of Sally Sattel. And she is a psychiatrist and a resident scholar of the American Enterprise Institute and the visiting president of the Department of Psychiatry department at Columbia University, and the Vangelos College of Physicians and Surgeons. And she says she calls this, when doctors feel pressured, patients suffer, and she called it opioid phobia, and that it is falling on the shoulder of experiencing acute chronic pain, many who have found themselves abandoned by healthcare providers in the name of preventing opioid abuse and addiction. And so what happens is that the government has set these parameters, and if you don't follow them, they will come in and enrage you and destroy your reputation and those sort of things. The results is that people are committing suicide. People are being deprived and committing suicide. And as this article pointed out, that suicide is perhaps the worst outcome that has happened as a result of this abuse by the government on chronic pain patients and acute pain patients. And as they have used these policies to target predominantly people of color who practice medicine, or I'm talking about all of medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, and those sort of things, and we talk about suicide, most of these guidelines have endangered unintended consequences, have caused the death of white people to commit suicide. And that's
because the inadequate application of use of the opioid, justifiable use of the opioid or the drugs that deal with pain.
Absolutely. And she writes, suicide is perhaps the most devastating consequence of the crackdown of the opioid prescription. Now, we're talking about prescription medication, okay? And I'll make it clear that these medications are not for recreational use, okay? And I want people to understand the so-called opioid crisis. Listen to what is being said, and you'll always hear the same thing. Oh, these people are abusing the medication and people are dying of overdose. Overdose. Listen to that very carefully. Abusing the medication. When you abuse, and they say these medications are dangerous. Well, let me just tell you this. As a pharmacist, as a dentist, okay, I don't care what it is. First of all medications, I don't care what it is, are dangerous. And anytime you take any medication, and I'll start with aspirin, beyond its therapeutic dose, that's abuse, and it will kill you. All right? So what is happening here is people are taking these medications, are taking these medications when they take prescription medication, and they're taking too much of it, or they're taking it along with something that they're not supposed to take them with, and they are dying. Okay? But that's only a small percentage, because most of the, quote, we're going to use the word opioid, deaths and abuse come from the illegally non-medical counterfeit opioid derivatives, fentanyl, okay, which is a medication, but it's normally made, used illegally, it's shipped over here, and is put in tablet form and powder form. In fact, it's a patch, okay? And it's shipped over, people order it on the mail, from the mail. Generally, it comes from either China or Mexico, okay? And it comes to this country, you only need a small amount. It's like 1,000 times more powerful than morphine, okay? Very small amount, all right? You get a high, but you also get a death. And this is stuff that's not prescribed at all. These are stuff, street drugs, we would call it, that are being bought off the internet, all right, or off the street. Fentanyl. Those are where your deaths are being caused from. Prescription med or heroin. And heroin is something that we don't dispense or don't use at all here in America as part of a therapeutic regimen. Now, they do use it in Europe. There is a heroin use that is used for medical purposes in Europe. All right. Professor Carl Hart, who's at the Columbia University and part of their neuroscience department, talks about this and stuff. But the heroin that is the people that have either fentanyl abuse or heroin abuse or that in a combination, are these illegal non-medical. Remember, these are for non-medical. These are people are using this stuff recreationally. Are dying from these medications. Very little of it is prescription. What has happened is that the guidelines that were used, that the CDC developed, what they forgot to do, and here's the tragedy and the scandalous thing of the whole thing. They developed these guidelines establishing a level that was like called the MME, morphine milligram equivalent. So they took every control medication that was an opioid derivative, oxycodone, hydromorphone, methadone, oxymorphone, and stuff, and set a standard to it based on its equivalency to morphine. All right. The problem with that is that the science they use is flawed. Nobody knows where it came from. Nobody understands these guidelines were developed by an organization called PROP, Physicians for the Rightful Use of Opioid Prescription, okay? And it turns out this organization has a very shaky and peculiar past, one of which is that they have an economic interest in the drug that's used to counter narcotic overdose called naloxone, Suboxone. There's a company called I don't have it right with me, but it's very shaky. So they somehow got into the CDC, all right, the Center for Disease Control, and were able to get together, and they secretly developed these guidelines so that people could be taken off, or what we call tapered off of these chronic control medications and put on this Suboxone so they can make a profit. And the other thing that the thing forgot to include, its guidelines failed to include those people who were suffering from chronic diseases. For example, it says, it forgot every patient that has sickle cell disease or terminal cancer, okay? They never considered these patients who were taking these medications chronically. So what happened is that people who had sarcoidosis, which is the disease you see prevalent in Black folk, does happen in white folk. People who had sickle cell anemia, all right, terminal cancer, things like that, were all then immediately classified as druggies. All right, and their dosages were reduced, and so you had these guidelines. I mean, these guidelines were poorly developed and didn't include them. And the government, then the government, the Drug Enforcement Agency and the Department of Justice began to enforce these guidelines. They were only guidelines. They codified them and then made them into law, and then began to use that for prosecuting doctors, pharmacists, dentists, and anybody who prescribed. And it has had a dramatic effect. And here's what she says. This is 8 out of 10 said the pain, the quality of their life had been worsened. And more than 40% said they had considered suicide as a way to end suffering. Even some patients with sickle cell anemia and terminal cancer subgroups that the CDC explicitly excluded from the research guideline were not immune to the painful dose reduction complete cutoff program. So in other words, once these guidelines became codified, the Drug Enforcement Agency, now they have no business, and began to enforce these guys. So we need to reduce everybody that are taking these type of medication to a certain amount, to a fictitious dose. And they did it. And any doctor that didn't comply, any pharmacist that they felt that they could use to target was then targeted. They could have been arrested, and they could have been sent to and lose their pharmacy license and those sort of things, Dr. Baylor. And this is what's been happening all around the country. This is a scandal, and it's what Dr. Jeffrey Singer stated is going to turn out to be one of the greatest American tragedies of here. This is a major scandal of prosecutors, police, and law enforcement. In fact, we refer to it as a law enforcement scandal, in which sadly people are dying, and people need to be made pay for this type of thing. In fact, he says what the legislature, one of the things he said, unfortunately, this methodology, which became the foundation of the CDC catastrophic 2016 publication prescribing guidelines for prescribing, has metastasized ever since one state after another had passed laws limiting prescribing of the opioid analgesic, often based on guidelines' erroneous conclusions. In retrospect, it is not surprising that such a baseless document was created. Is the first, and the key here is that one, the CDC, the Center of Disease Control, has no business. They have no expertise, and they lack authority into setting guidelines. The CDC lacks both authority and expertise to regulate drugs. This is a function of the Food and Drug Administration. Second, the anti-opioid physician group, Physicians for the Responsible Opioid Prescribing, which also lacks expertise in drugs and pharmacology, has undue influence with the CDC, and relationship that remains nebulous to this day. And so what has happened is, let me step away from
what has happened
at the door. What is happening?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Can I step away? I got to answer the door a minute. Is that possible in this interview?
Okay, yes, sir. This is the Wisdom Table coming to you from the Grand Houses in Harlem, USA, 125th Street and Amsterdam Avenue.
Okay.
The Grand Houses Community Radio is independent. It's one of the first applied to or based in a public housing complex. Another one is in East Harlem, and that is the James Weldon Johnson Houses, and that has an independent radio station. In fact, when we do broadcasts, they simulcast between the two. Whatever you hear on one, you hear on the other to a great extent. I'm Brother Leroy,
Yeah, hold on a
handling
minute.
a workshop of senior
Right.
women,
So
guiding them to operate their own programs. And that's the first in the U.S. where senior women in a housing development are being
hello, how you doing?
trained, I don't like the word trained, but being educated into using their resources, and their resources is their brains and their experience. And we're doing very well with a number of women in that regards. Our guest today is Brother Norman Clement. We're talking about Black-owned pharmacies, and his dialogue has included other pharmacies that are falling victim to the DEA and the CDC. Brother Norman Clement, are you back?
Yes, I am back. And so,
here's a question.
Yes,
here's a question that the book that the lady in Columbia University has written covers the pharmacies and doctors who prescribe opioid medication, covers everyone. The question is, has the efforts of DEA and the so-called guidelines, the CDC, fallen heavier on Black-owned pharmacies, or is it just equal across the board?
Or once again, we are the major targets because we are the easy to enforce against, right?
Because
we are the main targets because we're the ones who are easier to enforce laws and aberrant laws against. You see this
pattern. How is that?
Oh, Black in America, racism. We refer to it as regulatory racism in terms of the regulations of these state boards of pharmacies and medicines and the regulatory procedures are no different from what we have in our policing, our state policing, where we are easier to target against, our community to target. The war on drugs.
Let me slide this in there. Let me slide this in there for the audience. It's called selective enforcement.
Exactly. In fact, we refer to that. Are we talking about the law or the selective enforcement?
Let's stretch it to the average person, the average Black person who hears this and they say, well, it applies to everybody. No. Selective enforcement means there's a law on the books, whatever it is, jaywalking.
Right.
5,000 non-Black people cross the street against the light. One Black person comes to the avenue right behind the 5,000 non-Black individuals. That one person crosses the street, and all of a sudden the SWAT team has him, throwing him down, giving him a ticket, and carting him away. Now, that's an exaggeration, but that's what it is.
And the
selective enforcement. It's across the board. And therefore, we have to look not only at ourselves, which Norman Clement is doing, but we have to look at the whole. But when we come to filtering out what's what, we hear the Black ones, the Black-owned pharmacies are the most hurt in terms of what is going on with the DEA. I want to go to an example, Brother Norman Clement, so that people can understand the impact of these measures applied to so-called everyone, but falling heavier on Black people, Black-owned businesses. That's what a pharmacy is. It's a business.
Right. So
take one of them. Take one of the ones that you know of. It can be yours, or it can be a fellow owner, and that is the impact. The impact that it makes on that business. They're doing business. They're doing a pharmacy business, doing it well. They're adhering to all laws, etc. And then they hit this situation where these people come in and start citing them for this, that, and the other, and it's bogus. Talk about the impact on the income. Talk about the income, the impact on the employment that these pharmacies have.
Yeah. So here's one classic example is they will come in and they will say that they'll take like about the same amount, 15 patients. They'll say these patients are suspicious. They've been diverting their medications. And you see this in every case. And you find out they've never interviewed any of these patients, all right? And they said that we're going to strip your license because these patients, you should have never filled these prescriptions at all. No reasonable pharmacist would have ever filled these prescriptions, all right? This is the garbage they use. And the same patients they cite are going to white-owned pharmacies, and you can check it off our PDM system, and getting their medications filled, the same doctors, the same amount, okay? The same patients, and the DEA says nothing. And they're continuing to get their medications to this day. There's another one. There's this DEA has a chart where they can chart every person, every controlled medication, and which pharmacy fills what. All right. In our area, in a 5-year period, we filled, I think it was, I'm not maybe exaggerating here a little bit, 450,000 dosages of controlled medication. All right. People said, wow, that's a lot, right? We were like number 200. Or, in fact, we were number 370 something. All right, in those doses, there were the highest person was a pharmacy down a hospital. Then CVS, they filled 40 million doses during the same time. 30 million doses for the next week. It went on. We were nowhere near that. We're like number 300 and something. And you see this pattern. Martin, who you had on, Martin Aju, Oak Hill Pharmacy. I think he was like number 600 in West Virginia or something like that. And the other guys here in here in Florida that had the same problem. Yet we were targeted, and the other guys weren't. So you see this institutional racism, structural racism designed to put us out of business. Anytime, sabotage is what we would call it. Anytime a Black man is in a business in this country, of what appears to be that we are successful in our businesses, all of a sudden, here they come. And it doesn't stop. I hear too many times, and the sad part is that our leadership ignores this. They go, we need to all go into business and we need to go out here and get our degrees, and we do that. But what they don't tell you is, and they won't let us tell you, the sabotage that is taking place. The fact that
the sabotage, the active sabotaging of Black businesses.
Absolutely.
That's what you're
so Tampa.
Now wait a minute. Stop there.
Yes, sir.
Someone's going to say, well, you're talking about pharmacies. You're talking about every Black business. You're talking about da-da-da. What can you cite in terms of other Black-owned businesses being impacted, not by the opioid, but just in terms of their running or doing business?
Well, I just say, look at the record. Anytime you have a place where you have a successful Black man or woman in a business, it comes under scrutiny, some sort of scrutiny. We make a statement that Tampa is Tulsa. And we've seen this any place where you have an active, thriving Black community. You have had it decimated by powers to be. If you had, even if it's they don't have to come and do it. They'll just build a highway through your neighborhood. Detroit, Black Bottom. You know, Tulsa, we see the destruction of Tulsa. And let me tell you something. There's an interesting study on that one, and people don't talk about that. This is a pattern that taken where anywhere you see a concentration of black folk. The United States Marines were sent to Haiti in 1915 to disrupt the Haitians. You know, these Haitians were becoming too successful even despite all the craziness with the loans that they gave them and stuff. They still had this drive to be Haitians. You couldn't own a business. And one of the ways and then the Haitians said, oh, we don't want the Marines. We're not going to build your railroad to north to Leclerc and stuff. And he sold the property to this guy was named McDonald. He was a businessman, okay? And of course, you know, the Haitians got mad. And so the United States Marines, guess what they did? They came and not only they attacked the Haitians, but they employed the use of bombs, dropping them from the air, okay? Read the story. In fact, I was listening to this lecture yesterday about Haiti, the Haitian Revolution. And they said that these guys would write home and tell them how unhuman these Haitians were and stuff. These same racists that generals and whatever and stuff. And I say that they deployed the same tactics in Tulsa of the bombing. Pull this stuff up, all right? So we see that this is an extension. Here we are, people who are successful. We've worked hard. We've done everything you're supposed to. We've gone in and not only we got our MD degrees, but we've gone in and we're now ear, nose, and throat surgeons, head, neck surgeons. We wear our heads and hair and dreads, but we have a conscious mindset about our people. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
We can
yes.
be men or women. I think you know somebody like that. I do too. And what happens? All of a sudden, oh, well, you didn't dot the I and put the period here. And we have this regulatory department. They're the polices, okay? We call them, they're the same as the police, all right? Sub-polices, I call them, the regulatory. And they have the same racist mindset as a Derek Chauvin by putting their knees on the necks of black businesses to find violation. And you see this pattern all over the country. We write about it, how it affected, we go in Chicago, there exists now a pharmacy desert where there are no pharmacies in this area, but a few CVSs which are stretched out miles wide. I know guys who were black and had pharmacies, okay? And what did they talk about? Here comes the state board. Here it comes, and they're used particularly drugs to go after us. And let me help you understand that, drugs, okay? Drug war. Because the fundamental thing that the war on drugs has done, it has allowed to let our people, our neighborhoods, become war zones, and the people in those war zones to become combatants. Okay, some like you see in Haiti. So in other words, demoralize. This is Beirut, you know, and this is Baghdad. You know what I'm saying? And so they view the people and the citizens of these people as combatants. But remember that they do the same thing everywhere else. Iraq, you see it. Beirut, they can't distinguish the good guys from the bad guys. Vietnam, the good guys from the bad guys, and they end up bombing everybody. And they piss everybody off, if you can use that word here on this dignified show.
Okay, let's deal with this aspect. And that is business, that's the broad title.
Right.
Pharmacies, that's the broad title.
Yes.
Take one or two of the pharmacies that you know, black-owned pharmacies that have been targeted, and the impact on the income. For example, take one and say, all right, this guy was making or generating X amount of revenue a year. Yeah. He was employing X number of people. etc. Give
All right.
that kind of example.
Yeah. So we got a guy. Everybody said, "Oh, Norm, you must have done." All right. How do you explain my buddy Louis Latson? Okay, and I knew Louis. I've met Louis a couple of times. Louis, quiet guy, just took care of me. He and I are the same age. Okay, graduated from Creighton University School of Pharmacy. He had a pharmacy called Lincourt Pharmacy. Had about 60 employees, and they did
How many?
60. They did 60 plus employees. And they did highly specialized compounding, sterile compounding, and normal and non-sterile.
Explain what those
sterile
that
compounding.
is.
Yeah, sterile compounding would include like IV medications. Okay. And this was way back in the day, what we would call, let's say, 20 years or 30 years. He started this business. And non-sterile compounding would be like creams and ointments and those sort of things. And he kept this place, he improved his place, he owned the building. He's doing like about $15 million, $20 million a year in business. He's able to support his family. He's got a compounding pharmacy and a regular pharmacy in there. And he's doctors that are dependent upon him. He's working with cancer patients, chronic pain patients. He's from all over the country. He's shipping this stuff all over the country. He's not only just doing narcotics, but antibiotics and those sort of things. He has whatever any pharmacy, whatever any doctor or specialist needed, let's say at Johns Hopkins University or in California, any of the UCLA Medical Center and stuff, people would go to Lincourt Pharmacy. All right. So what happens? The Drug Enforcement Agency comes into Lincourt Pharmacy. All right. And we're coming to do a routine investigation. And they go in and they find nothing wrong. Absolutely nothing they can find. Now, first of all, go in to find something wrong. Okay? Find nothing. Okay, sure, no problem. The next thing they do is they go to his suppliers. All right, the people who have licensure to supply narcotic analgesic medication, control medications, IV medications, anything that goes into supplying, to allowing a pharmacy to operate as a pharmacy. They go to the suppliers and they use a thing called a good neighborhood clause, which they have really. Almost something similar we see in some good neighborly. And they tell these suppliers, we're going to cancel your contracts. We're going to cancel your DEA license if you do business with Lincourt Pharmacy. All right. And one by one, all of his suppliers start canceling, close their accounts. He couldn't even get credit. All right. And one by one, and then they came and said, well, we think you've been a little excessive. Well, based on what? Well, we don't know, but we think a little bit excessive. All right.
No, I'm sorry. They said what?
Accuse him of being excessive. Now, remember how a pharmacy worked? Yes. Remember how a pharmacy worked? You only fill the prescriptions or fill orders that the physicians have sent you. Okay. But they did this without looking at any of the disease state of the patients, without examining any patient, without talking with any of the physicians. They automatically said that you are a criminal enterprise. That's what they did. And in fact, it destroyed. He sold that pharmacy. He had to sell it in order to pay the legal fees, okay? He said he sold his pharmacy for peanuts to some guys from India. And somewhere around $500,000. A place worth almost $40 or $50 million when you look at the building and how this guy built up generational wealth and also did all the things you would normally do if you were a pharmacy business. The Drug Enforcement Agency attacked Louis Latson, Ladson, Louis Latson, and got away with it. All right? Just as they did the same thing to me. And in our case, what they did was we were compounding our own controlled medications. Okay. And so they came in and had the suppliers, told them, you don't sell the Pronto Pharmacy. Well, we were compounding certain controlled medications, all right? Not our into capsule form, all right? Using guidelines set forth by the FDA. That angered them. So you know what they did? They accused me of manufacturing oxycodone and hydromorphone. Manufacturing oxycodone and hydromorphone. All right, and really, that's how sloppy this so-called a suspension order was. But it turns out, you know how difficult it is to manufacture oxycodone? You have to first get the raw materials and from Thabine, and you got to synthesize it, and you got to go through a whole process. Get it from Tasmania. Hydromorphone is even more complex than that. But that's how sloppy these guys are. That's how racismo driven they are. And of course, they got plausible denial, you know, all that kind of stuff. And then they accuse me of you needing a separate license. You don't need a separate license to compound a raw material that you get from a supplier, oxycodone or hydromorphone, which I get from a supplier and compounded it. But it is a certain technique that must be used and followed in all pharmacies when you're doing what we call compounding. All right? You have to follow, it's like a recipe. You got to follow a certain procedure. We were highly trained in this, okay? I've done this for 40 years. You know, you got to keep detailed. When you're working with narcotics, you've got to keep detailed records. And we did. So they came in, couldn't find anything wrong with their records. So what did they do? They manufactured fraud. And you see this again in the at-cost firm. You see this again in golf course. You see this again with Martin. And in Martin's case, after you interviewed Martin with Oak Hill Pharmacy, the interesting thing was Oak Hill Pharmacy was just only dispensing medication to treat people that had that had been being treated for opioid or narcotic. You try getting them off of these type of medication, which is extremely difficult. That's another story. But they were dispensing Suboxone. And even the dispensing of Suboxone was too much for the DEA because he was making too much money as far as they were concerned. And he went to court and he won. That's Martin. He went to court and he won. And they still came after them. And Martin had to close his business. Okay? What is the impact on me? I made millions. Okay? So what is the impact on me? Well, this week, I can't even get my lease renewed. And so guess what? I got to walk away from it. I got to find another place for this business. And as you can see in the background, we're getting our stuff out of here to move. Because this is the type of destabilization of these pharmacies. And they do the same thing in medicine. They do the same thing in dentistry, you know, and those are acute.
What you're saying, wait a minute, what you're saying is that dental centers run by blacks, medical centers run by blacks, male and female are being targeted also. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
So, okay, so, so wait a minute.
We're being classified as drug dealers.
You're giving an insight into something that is impacting on the Black community. And the victims are not saying anything to address the wrong and address their people.
That victims are
Normal
saying,
criminals.
okay, no, that's not true. The victims have been saying anything. Latson tried to tell people about it. The people aren't paying attention. It's just a classic. Oh, well, you know, I mean, it's almost like our group suffers from what we call intellectual insecurity. When we present these things to people, oh, well, you know, and unfortunately, our Black organizations are, they're organized, I belong to them. They're social organizations, okay? And what they have to do is they have to wait permission. They're like waiting for permission to say something. All right, that's as raw as you get. They won't say anything at all because they get a little funding from the government. They don't want to be too activist here. But and you see this. Lewis said, man, I went around and told people what was going on, and then that lady just, oh well, Louis. And it's like they're envious or jealous and are happy to see your demise. I mean, really. But you know, white Indian doctors and white doctors somewhat suffer the same thing. You know, you would think that it didn't happen, but it comes across the board. But for us, it's even more dramatic because it really affects our health. And this has been going on quite a time. I wrote an article, found a study that was done out of the University of Miami, okay? And it's talking about how flawed and physician unscientific guidelines are being wrongfully used to send physicians and pharmacists to jail, okay? What happens is, and there was another one called The Real Reason. It's called In Sickness, and another one called In Sickness and in Health, Exposing the Pain of Structural Racism and the Mindset, the Treatment of the Terminally Ill Black Patients, okay? And the need for Congress to oversight. Pay attention to that one. And what these people, this is from the University of Miami, 2005. And what they were showing is that minority patients with cancer are at risk for undertreatment for cancer-related pain. This is the study talking. This is not Norm Clement talking, okay? Mm-hmm. Study-related pain, barriers to pain control have surveyed primarily non-Hispanic Caucasian patients. The purpose of this current study was to explore the barriers of optimal pain management among African American and Hispanic patients with cancer through the use of structural patient interviews. So they did all these interviews, okay? Most African American patients, 93%, and all Hispanic patients stated that they discussed they discussed their cancer pain with their doctor and nurse. However, more than half of the African American patients, 57%, 38% of the Hispanic patients indicated that their doctor and nurse did not ask about the pain prior to the patient telling them about the pain. Only 25% of the African American patients, 29% of African indicated that their doctor and nurse used pain scales for pain assessment. All right. Unfortunately, all patients indicated that they would wait until their pain was severe, 7 to 6, before they would make a telephone call to their doctor or oncologist. These are people with terminal cancer. Okay. These are people, and you know when the study was done? 2005. This out of the university, from the Journal of the American Cancer Association, perceived need of barriers to optimal control, cancer management among underserved minority patients. Excuse me, it was 2002. All right. Did you hear about it? Did you hear any of our Black organizations ever say anything about this?
No.
Yeah. Did you? Here's another article. That was Robert. I was pulling this stuff up. This one's called "Don't Get Cancer If You Are Black and Hispanic," examining the effects of pervasive regulatory racism and unlawful constitutional predatory policing by the United States Justice Department and the need for Congress to congressional investigation. The problem is what Louis Laston told me. Our Congress, despite we have a lot of folks that are in control, okay, chairman of committees, okay, they, bro, I'll put it between you and I, okay? Nobody, I hope nobody's listening. They lack character, man. Okay? Please don't let this between you and I. Don't let that get out. Don't please don't. They don't. We've been sending letters to all the top chairmen, black folk, okay, and white folk of these committees. All right, and what we said the war, what we've been there to show is that black folk ain't getting, even if you got cancer, exposing the pain of racism and its mindset in the treatment of the terminally ill black patient and Hispanic patient. Okay, these people are terminally ill and need the pain medication. Hell, if you can't treat those patients decently like human beings, what the hell do you think is going to happen to me or so? You know, if a doctor, like, let's say a doctor like a doctor in your area, like Beverly Prince, for example, walks in and say there's a diagnosis. This guy's got a terminal cancer that's spreading down the pharyngeal wall, and we're going to have to give them some sort of pain relief and stuff, you know, that is necessary in order to controlling the person's pain to give them a dignified existence. The next thing you know, woo, 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 woo. Except they don't come with flashing lights and stuff. They just come. And they come and accuse her of that, this, that, the other, things like that, you know. And imagine the pressure on that and then put your name out in the paper and stuff. So the profound, and as we write in this article, that the war on drugs has had a profound role in reinforcing racial hierarchies. Although Black Americans are more likely than whites to use illicit drugs, they are 6 to 10 times more likely to be incarcerated for drug offense. Meanwhile, after a different system responding to the drug use of whites has emerged. And let me tell you, that's not our statement. You know who wrote that? A study done by the NIH. Really, okay. A study done by the NIH that wrote that, and it's called White Opioid and the War That Never Was. And do you think, based on that foundation alone, that these were white folks saying that there was an injustice here? Our Black organizations, our Black congressional people should have been jumping all over this, okay? Jumping all over this. This is an injustice. Our Black, I think there's a Black guy representing Harlem. I'll leave it alone. Okay. I think that Harlem, and he sits on a high committee there, all right? Come on, we've sent letters to him. Hey, there's something going on here. There's something going on. We've been saying over. We know how many articles we've written. Dental survey, this organization, and you're within the norm, 157, okay? And we've had a very little response from news media and stuff on this. News media and print media has been basically non-existent and stuff. We had one guy who was very interested. I think his name was Leroy Baylor. I don't know if you knew this guy, man, but he's been interested in this. We've had organizations. And this is, remember now where this research is coming from. This research ain't coming from just Norm, Clement. This is coming from our most educated people that sit down and have formed a little think tank, okay? And we sit here and we argue with each other and have spats with each other, but we put our collective minds and introduce this, that, and the other. That's why everybody's on that thing. Every time I get some information from one guy from Chicago named Jay Josie's of Indian ancestry. We never met him, but he's describing the same thing. There's another guy named another group that we ran by a guy named Richard Lawhorn. Okay, another one, Jeff Bloom. He's Another one, Jeff Singer, Cato Institute. Okay, all of them are describing the same occurrences when it comes to the enforcement of the so-called punishment, or this peculiar scandal that's taking place in terms of pain and the criminalization of pain. We have seen it from a Black point of view, and they have described it from a white point of view, and have indicated that these things cross the board all over and that they are wrong. And yet, the opioid crisis is something that people they keep opioid. And when you ask them, law enforcement, well, what type of opioid are you talking about? Huh? Are you talking about oxycodone or hydromorphone? It'd be like somebody saying that you had a steroid crisis, okay? Well, what steroid were you talking about? Because they all have the similar structure. It's just modification at the terminal end that, this is from a science point of view, that changes its ability to absorb, to change its duration, and change the route of administration, how we use what we're going to swallow, whatever. But anyways.
Brother Norman.
Yes, sir.
Brother Norman and Clement, let's conclude this segment with how folks can be on the list for your newsletter. And before you tell us that, and then I have to ask you the story behind the newsletter, how it got started.
All right.
So how can people plug in and be a part of the subscriber list to your newsletter?
All it is type in YOUAR within WITHIN, the norms, THNORMS.com. You are within the norms.com. All you have to do is type it up. And on Facebook, you say you're within the norms, YOU_RE within the norms.com. That's all you do. And all these articles will pop up. We have made them colorful. And it says I've traveled all over the world. I've taken pictures all over the world. And so we use these pictures as part of our montage in getting people to say, hey, there's something on here. And the other thing is that these articles are supported oftentimes by a video narrative from the patients. And they're also their historical value. They talk about the opium wars, for example, and how this country's policy was to impose opium onto China, and that 100 years of humiliation. And we even explored the geopoliticality, if you want to use that word, of this whole crisis, in that if this country and Britain and the European countries decimated China, 10,000-year dynasty, using opium, can you decimate a 274-year nuclear power dynasty using fentanyl? Think about it. Well, maybe they're saying, hey, what you did to us is, we know what you did to us. Remember now, did to us, well, we're going to give it back to you. And remember how we talk about China and the people and their thinking. You always hear they think 500 years in the past,
right,
10,000 years forward. We see China, for example. I heard was listening to a lecture yesterday of Dr. Jeffries. I think it was Leonard Jeffries. He was talking about China's impact. He was on the Carl Nelson show talking about China's impact into Africa. We need to pay attention to that. And he said almost the same thing, that what China did, and we write about this in this article, what China did was, it was called the sick man of Asia, okay? And what happened is that they, through brutal terminally, overcame that, and they began to educate their people under communism, okay? communism.
All right, we're going to stop. Okay, we're going to stop there because that is a very interesting story that we're going to have to, on this side, the wisdom table, we're going to have to attack. I want to tell the audience that they should really pay very close attention to what they've heard today, to check out their own pharmacies in their communities and see how many are Black owned, and begin to pay attention to Black businesses, which Black business owners don't talk about what has happened to them. It's like lambs, they're silent. And that's another story in general. But we want to thank you, Brother Norman Clement. We will have you back again. And what we're going to do on the next segment is give a diagram of the so-called court system that the Black pharmacies are confronted with. You alluded to that in the beginning. No. Because we got to conclude. The point is that once the audience sees how the structure is, then they can see that it's actually a kangaroo court at best. Right. So, my brother, I want to thank you once again. Also, to tell the audience how to plug into your newsletter.
Okay. It's youarewithinthenorms.com. And can I make just one little comment here? You'll believe it or not, we are joined today by the lovely, talented, industrious physician and advocate herself, Dr. Beverly Prince, who's been listening to this broadcast on my iPod, and she happens to be listening to this right now. And we're just so happy. I'm just happy to have her here. She's on the iPad here, listening in to this broadcast and stuff. So we are one of our talented, one of our esteemed medical scientists that we have not really appreciated for her wisdom and her knowledge and her care to our community. I just want to thank you to add that in there. She's not saying anything. How you doing, Beverly? But thank you so much.
Excellent.
For having
thank you, my brother, and thank you, Dr. Beverly, and I want to thank the engineering staff of Brother Stu and Brother Doug and Sister Esther Hyatt also on the wisdom table, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. God bless you all with a super and dynamic day. This interview is taking place on the, if I'm right about today, what is the day's date, brother? You got 26. me, the
26th of June.
26.
Yep.
Of June. More. All right. Okay. All right. Gotta find my place on the map. God bless you, my brother.
All right. God bless you. Okay.
All right. Peace.
Thank you. Peace out. All right. Bye now.